Welcome back to 95 Connected, a Baltimore, Maryland sports podcast. This is Pat, your host. I am running solo tonight again. I actually did not have plans to record, but there were a couple things that have happened within the last 30 or so hours that I figured I had things to say and I want to get them out into the ether. So basically what I want to talk about tonight is two things. A little bit about Jesse Minter. I'll cover that first. It's not going to take very long because I think there's a lot more that I wanted to see happen to really judge that hire. Things like who's going to be the OC, DC, etc. But the main thing that'll be talked about is what has been announced today with the college football playoff format. And then just in general, how that fits into just the insanity that is the college sports landscape right now. I said a couple weeks ago in my hot take that we are in a bubble that is ready to burst. And I think some of the things that have happened in the past week in college sports are just pieces of evidence that something is going to give eventually. But so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'll just start off with the Ravens and Jesse Minter. So Ravens hired Jesse Minter, the current, now former Chargers defensive coordinator under Jim Harbaugh, but he previously did work under John Harbaugh on the Ravens from 2017 to 2020 as a defensive assistant and a defensive backs coach. He had some time at Michigan. He had some time at Vanderbilt before heading to Los Angeles to be the Chargers defensive coordinator. And based on what I said last week and what Nathan said last week when he guest hosted on here, was we both felt that a defensive minded coach was the way to go. And obviously that's exactly what Jesse Minter is. So it seems like that's a good start. And not only is he defensive minded coach, but he's got success. He was an assistant on some good Ravens defenses, notably the 2019 defense, which was a pretty good defense down the stretch. He had some great defenses at Michigan. They are the number one defense a couple years ago when they won the national championship. So there's some pedigree there, which is good. So I just think it's the right move. And reports are that Eric DeCosta or whomever reached out to some of the players, including Lamar, and said, "This is where we want to go. What do you think?" And there was unanimous support. So with that, like I said, I think it's one of the right moves you could have made. We talked about Brian Flores last time, but he ended up signing an extension with the Vikings. We talked about Robert Saleh, who ended up signing on with the Titans as their head coach. So this is one of those top options. And I think it'll be good. And like I said at the beginning of this, it's really about a couple things. What does the rest of the staff look like? We know Zach Orr is gone. We know Todd Monken is gone. So who's he going to fill in? Is it going to be Cliff Kingsbury in the OC spot? Who's he going to slide in the defensive coordinator? Which you would expect or think that Jesse Minter is going to be the one calling the defensive plays. So the coordinator essentially then becomes kind of a consultant or an assistant there. But obviously you still want somebody in there with a probably more experience than Zach Orr had going into this. Is it going to be somebody that he worked with at Michigan? Is it going to be somebody he worked with in LA? Who knows? But that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is you can put whoever you want as the head coach. You can put whoever you want as the defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. It then boils down to how do you fill in the personnel? Because we know that the two biggest gaps on this past Ravens team were the two lines, the offensive and defensive line. So how does he fill that in? How does he make a big splash somewhere? Do they restructure with Lamar to be able to go out and make a big free agency splash for some of those guys in the trenches? Are they able to make a blockbuster trade? And everybody throws the name Max Crosby around, where that's I wouldn't call it a pipe dream, but obviously that's best case scenario. Don't know what it takes to get something like that done. But that's really, you can't judge this hire until you really see not only how does he feel in the staff, but how does he feel in the personnel, and then until they hit the field. So that at this point, I think is everything I have to say about Jesse Minter. I would venture as that staff starts to fill in, as that roster starts to fill in, we'll bring this up again. We'll talk about it maybe later in the year as a part of a Ravens preview, preseason, whatever, something like that. But other than that, I don't think there's much to say. So I think on the face, I like it. It was something I said I was interested in last week. So we'll see. We'll see. But at this point, I need to get into the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk about here, which is just college sports, but specifically the college football playoff. So any of you who have listened to all of these episodes, which is probably like 6 people, you remember what I mentioned earlier, which was that I felt college sports in general, but more specifically college sports, is in a 90s.com like bubble where just everything that is happening does not seem sustainable, and it seems like something's going to give, and it's not going to be a good thing. It may be a good thing long term because it could force some changes to be made, but there is nothing that seems beneficial to the sport. Only things to the sports, I should say. Only things that seem beneficial to those who are trying to make money, which can be said about many things in this current world, which I'm not even going to get into. But from a sports perspective, everything, every single decision that is being made at every level, now at the college level, is about that. But what happened today was an announcement of the newest format for the college football playoff. So to get some background in here, college football playoff this past season, which Indiana ended up winning, was the first time that they were doing, or the second time that they were doing, a 12-team format. 2 years ago, they had some auto bids. They had some seeding weirdness where a team that was ranked, I'm just going to make it up, Boise State was ranked 10th in the rankings, got a bye just because they had won their conference, which at that time seemed a little bit weird. There seemed to be other teams who maybe deserved that bye more. So they ended up changing that. They didn't have these conference auto bids. And what ended up happening with the rankings and those who made field was, the big story was that Notre Dame was quote unquote snubbed. And if you really look at it, they were, only because there was the requirement to include one team from the G5 or G6 schools, which ended up being Tulane. They were the best team of those schools. So Tulane got a bid. Makes sense. But then they decided to throw JMU in as well, at the expense of Notre Dame within their rankings, because the 11th and 12th ranked teams for the 12-team field were Notre Dame and BYU. Obviously, you've got the G6 team in Tulane, who was ranked 20th. They're supplanting the 12th ranked team, which was BYU. Understandable. Makes sense. If you don't let a G6 team in to the playoff every year, you're basically telling them you don't matter. You should just go play in the FBS or the FCS. You just don't matter. Doesn't seem right. So they get the auto bid from G6, leaving out BYU. But then they throw in another G6 team in JMU at the expense of Notre Dame. And that sent the world into a tizzy. And I think understandably, JMU is not better than Notre Dame. There was no reason to include a second team from that set of conferences over a team like Notre Dame. And what happened was the debate became, why are you letting Miami in over Notre Dame? They have identical records. They have similar strengths of schedule. Why Miami over Notre Dame? And it boiled down to, well, Miami beat Notre Dame. That seemed to be the reason, with the weirdness of the fact that in the previous week's rankings, Notre Dame was ahead of Miami, and then they swapped them. Neither team lost. Neither team had a conference championship game. They just swapped them and put Miami in. Ultimately, I think Miami was a better team. I think that was almost them just correcting a mistake they had made already. But obviously it sent Notre Dame into a fit. And like I said, I think rightfully so. And JMU got beat, obviously. Tulane got beat, obviously. But Miami ends up going to the national championship, which they're a good team. They had a great defense. It makes sense. So it kind of ended up working out. I don't think Notre Dame would have gone far, but who knows? So that's what happened this past year. Indiana beat the snot out of everybody except for Miami. They ended up pulling away a bit at the end, had a lot of good plays, defensive plays, a block punt. Fernando Mendoza had an incredible run on fourth down, scored a touchdown, almost got helicoptered. But Miami was the deserving champion, undefeated all year. It was great. Nothing I'm about to say changes anything that kind of happened at the top. But I did maintain a position on a previous episode that if you're going to use the term Power Four, you have to have the conference champions in those four conferences, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, those conference championships have to matter, which means the winner of those conference championships get an auto bid to the playoff. And what would have happened this year is a 7-5 team in Duke gets into the playoff, which they're obviously not. They weren't even ranked in the college football playoff rankings. They just played the games that were in front of them. They got into the ACC championship. They win that game. In my opinion, they deserve to be in. So that is one of the changes that is coming for this upcoming season that they announced today. All four Power Four conference champions are going to get an auto bid. You have to assume, I didn't read too deeply into it, you have to assume that they will get reseeded. So if another 7-5 Duke type team wins one of those conferences, they're not going to get a bye. That I can only assume that. I think that's a good compromise. Personally, I think that was the right thing to do. If you're not going to have conference champions matter in the Power Four, then why have conference championships? Why should anybody play in those? Why should we even have a season? Just determine your rankings at the beginning of the year and say, these are the 12 teams that we think are going to get in. Everybody else just play your games for fun. And that's it. And we'll go from there. So I think that's the correct change to make, assuming, again, that they reseed. And before I go into the next change, looking at last year's or this past year's field, Here's how that would change this past year's field. Your auto bids become your Power Four champions, which was Indiana, Georgia, Texas Tech, and Duke. Those four get in. Your G6 auto bid is Tulane, because what they said was there's going to be a G6 auto bid. The highest ranked G6 team in the college football playoff rankings will get an auto bid. So that would be Tulane. So there's 5 teams that get the auto bid. From there, they're then going to fill in the rest of the field based on the college football playoff rankings. So using this past season's field, the remaining 7 teams that are filling in the bracket would be Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama, Miami. So the only change in that field is you are supplanting JMU with Duke, which I think just makes sense because Duke won their conference. JMU won their conference too, but they're G6. They're not playing the same people as Duke. Now, Duke lost a lot of games, but again, Duke played the schedules in front of them. They made it to the championship, and they did what they needed to do. They should be in. Are they going to go far? Probably not, but neither did JMU. So I think that's the right thing to do. Now, here's where it gets stupid. They added a Notre Dame clause. And the Notre Dame clause says that if Notre Dame is ranked within the top 12 of the CFP rankings at the end of the season, they get an auto bid. Effectively, because of this independent schedule that Notre Dame plays, they build their own schedule. Half of the games are going to play the ACC because they have a deal with the ACC. At this point, they have no incentive to schedule any difficult games because if they go 11-1, 10-2, you're going to assume that the committee is going to put them in the top 12 and they make the playoff. And here's how that would have changed this year's field. So you still have the same 5 auto bids, but now what you're filling in is Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Notre Dame. Notre Dame is now in at the expense of Miami, who was just in the national championship and honestly had a shot to win it. Just because you've added this clause that, you know what, Notre Dame needs to be treated differently because they're an independent school. They play an independent schedule. So we need to give them a shot. And it's complete insanity. And is it because Notre Dame has this insane alumni base? Does they have insane boosters who just went to the NCAA and said, if you guys don't fix this, if you guys don't basically rig this for us, what can they even do? What are they going to do? But that's basically what happened. They have effectively just gifted Notre Dame a spot into this playoff every single year. And it's going to be every year, probably at the expense of a team who is better than them. And the only thing that makes sense to me is that that's a money decision. They want to put Notre Dame in because they want to get more eyeballs on the screens. They want those people who root for Notre Dame just because they're Catholic. There's plenty of them out there. That's probably the majority of their fans. They're the most prestigious Catholic school in the country. That's why they have so many fans. Is it because they want those eyeballs on the screen? Is it because they have this history that, frankly, that's all it is history? The last time they won a national championship was 1988. And before that, they won a couple times in the 70s, one time in the 60s, and everything else is in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Who cares? Why? Why do we have to treat them differently? Why can't the NCAA just go to Notre Dame and say, tough, you have to, if you want to play this game in the NCAA, you need to join a conference because everybody else is in a conference. And if you want an auto bid, you got to go and win that conference. You can still get in. Obviously, if you beat the teams on your schedule, you don't win the conference, but you win most of your games, you still get in. But now they've effectively rigged it for Notre Dame. And what's the point? What is the point of that? Again, I think it's money. It's money. It's eyeballs on the screen. That's what they think is going to get the most eyeballs on the screen. And it makes me want to take my eyeballs off the screen. The problem I have is I am weak. Right now, sitting in front of me, I've got 4 games on mute, but I'm watching them all because I'm addicted to sports. I can't help it. I can't boycott a sport. I need to watch. I need to watch. So unfortunately, my eyeballs are going to be on the screen because it's what I like to do. But it just makes no sense. So what's the point in watching? I have my interest is low now that they are just rigging this for Notre Dame. So that's the newest news. That's what happened today. But it's part of a wider problem that is presenting itself in college sports. And next thing I'll go into is what's going on in college basketball. Another set of insane things that are happening. So a few years back, obviously we all know that NIL gets introduced, name, image, and likeness. And essentially what it was trying to do was right the wrong of the fact that there were players going to college. And, in the Baltimore and Maryland areas, you're driving down 95. As you get closer to College Park, you see billboards with Anthony Cowan, Juan Dixon, not at the same time. You see these guys on the billboards. They're advertising them. They're saying, come watch these people play. Spend your money at Maryland to come watch these guys play, and they wouldn't see a dime for it. You go buy a number 1 jersey, but it doesn't say Cowan on the back. So Anthony Cowan sees no money. Trying to right that ship. There was always the argument of should college players be paid? And this is I don't even know if it's a compromise. This is what they came up with. Name, image, and likeness. You can sign on with companies and you get paid as a college player, which I think is fine. I think it maybe could be done differently, but it's fine. But then, and this applies to football as well, and I assume even the non-revenue sports, the transfer portal. Years ago, and it's not that long ago, there was a rule that said if you transfer, you would have to sit out a year. And I don't remember all of the details on what those exceptions were, whether it was a transfer because of something medical, or a transfer because your coach got fired, or a transfer because you had a year of graduate eligibility. Those are the types of things that would grant you an exception to the rule that you had to sit out a year. They got rid of that. And now you can just transfer and go wherever you want every year. And there's no penalty. So what happens is, using Maryland as the example, okay, sure, there was a coaching change mixed in here, but the 2024 team and the 2025 team had a 0 player overlap. And again, a different situation with the coach, but that is crazy. When Gary Williams left Maryland, all the talk was about, at the time, Nick Faust, who was a big recruit by Gary Williams. What is he going to do? Is he going to go somewhere else because Gary Williams leaves? He stayed. A couple other players stayed. I don't remember exactly who it was. But they stayed. That just won't happen these days. And it doesn't even matter if the coach left or not. People are just going to go, you know what? I'm going to go from Maryland to Oregon State, which is where Nick Faust ended up going, just because I feel like I can make more money there with an NIL deal. And the NCAA just says, go, have a great time. And then that person who just transferred to Oregon State after that year can go, you know what? I'm going to go to Texas A&M. And the NCAA says, see you there. And they can do this an unlimited number of times within their eligibility. So what you lose with that is, from a fan's perspective, you lose the grow with your team deal. You show up to campus as a freshman, and there's a freshman on the basketball team or a freshman on the football team. And maybe they're an NBA talent, and maybe after 2-3 years they go to the NBA, but they're there. You watch a group of players play with each other for multiple years, get better over those years, new recruits coming in, filling out a roster. And by year 2, 3, 4, by year 3 and 4, really, you might be looking at a team to say, because of their experience, that's a contender. I felt that way my freshman year at Maryland. Now, I didn't grow with them because I was a freshman. But the starting five in the 2009-2010 season was Grievous Vasquez, senior, Eric Hayes, senior, Sean Mosley, junior, Jordan Williams, freshman, and then you slotted in guys like Dino Gregory at that time. Sophomore or junior. I want to say he was a junior. But you had people there who, Grievous Vasquez was a 4-year starter. That just doesn't happen anymore. And I don't think that's right. That makes college basketball just that much less fun. And college football. But now, not only that, you've got teams that are just going to turn over just because they can. This week, Charles, I'm going to botch the name here. Bediako. He played at Alabama. And after the 22-23 season, he went undrafted in the NBA draft, but he had put his name in the NBA draft. Goes undrafted. Okay. Maybe there's an argument to be made that if a player puts their name in the draft and they don't get drafted, they retain eligibility. All right. I can live with that, assuming they have any left. But he goes undrafted. And then he goes and plays in the G League. So he didn't sign an NBA contract. But this player played 37 games of professional level basketball. Yes, the G League is effectively, it is the NBA's minor league. People go up and down. Bronny James has gone up and down from the Lakers to the Lakers G League. but it's professional basketball. The moment that you step on a professional basketball court, you should be ineligible for college basketball. But apparently it's not that way. So now, this fella, who is a grown man, by the way, 23 years old, who has played 37 games of professional basketball, was just granted temporary eligibility with Alabama at 23 and will be playing against Tennessee in their next game. How is there anybody on this planet who looks at that and goes, you know what, that's a good thing? What are we doing? And that's probably going to be the title of this episode. What are we doing? The point of college basketball is for high school kids to have something to strive for. As you grow in sports, the chances that you make it to the next level decrease every time. Once you get into middle school basketball, not all of those kids in middle school basketball are going to make their high school team. I was one of them. I grew too fast. I got put with the forwards when I was a guard and I got beat up. I didn't make the team. Happens. Then you've got JV basketball players. Those middle school players, maybe they made JV. There's no guarantee they're going to varsity. That's an even smaller percentage that make varsity basketball. Then that percentage of players who played varsity basketball in high school, that percentage drops. I'm just going to make it up. It's got to be less than 1% of varsity basketball players will play Division I college basketball. And then you have your Division I college basketball players, probably less than 1%, maybe it's 2%, are going to play in the NBA. No, it's got to be less than 1%. But if you're adding professional basketball players to the college game, what are you doing? The only thing you are doing is removing an opportunity for either a high school player to make that team. You're removing a scholarship opportunity. Or in the case of this fella, he's joining a team mid-season. Maybe there's the sixth, seventh man on the bench, the seventh, eighth man on the bench, who's now going to stop playing because he's got a professional basketball player on his team. Why would they put him in? They just put the pro in. What are we doing? And then there's the whole argument that you see from people. Well, this is how they've done it with European players. European players can go play pro, and then they'll come over here and get college basketball eligibility. Okay, I disagree with that too. If you played professional basketball at any level in any country, I don't care if it's the professional basketball league in the Vatican. You can't play college basketball. Full stop. A couple weeks ago, there was a report that came out on Twitter from a writer for this website called On3, which is essentially a recruiting website, college recruiting website. They put out rankings, reports, they have inside scoops, whatever. A report came out saying that there was a player who had played minutes in the NBA, was being looked at by 15 teams. It ended up not being true. And the On3 website had to go and say, we don't know where this information came from. It was wrong. All of these schools who were listed said, we didn't do that. So it ended up being a big old nothing burger. But it seemed believable because of everything that has been happening in college sports. And we're just letting people who have played professional level basketball join a team midseason up because they have eligibility. And here's the other kicker on this Bediako guy. He had to sue in order to get eligibility because the NCAA had originally told him, nope, no eligibility. So he sues the NCAA. He gets granted temporary status by a judge to say, there's more to be done here. This isn't a final decision, but while this is being litigated further, you are granted eligibility to play starting now until the next phase of the litigation occurs. Turns out that judge is an Alabama donor. It turns out his wife was the lawyer or one of the lawyers for one of the Alabama players 4 or so years ago, a teammate of this guy who now has eligibility, was one of the lawyers for one of those players who got in trouble for there was a murder, and then who did the gun come from? And there was a player on Alabama, name escapes me, but he was pretty clearly involved. He handed off the murder weapon, whatever. That player's lawyer is this judge's wife. And we're just going to accept that. That's just the way it is. And the NCAA, a while ago, came out and said, well, we stand firm that if you have signed an NBA contract, you have no eligibility within the NCAA. Well, great. So that tells me that LeBron James has no eligibility, despite him not playing a single minute of college basketball. That tells me that Victor Wembanyama has no eligibility, despite having not played a single minute of college basketball. Okay, great. Thanks for clearing that up. But because you used the phrase signed an NBA contract, well, this guy, Charles Bediako, despite having played professional basketball, is playing. What are we doing? How is this a good thing? And the answer is it's not a good thing. Again, it is all about how can we as the NCAA, how can we as an institution chasing athletic revenue, how can we make more of that? So Alabama's adding a professional player to their team. You would assume they're going to win more games with that. They're going to sell more tickets. They're going to make the tournament. They were going to make the tournament anyway. Is that just the end goal? It clearly is. There's no other explanation for this to be allowed. And you're just ruining it. You're ruining the point of college basketball. So again, I said it earlier, I wish I could mentally boycott, but I can't, because if I boycott college basketball, what am I going to do in March? Or watch spring training? I mean, I guess Premier League's on, but that's one day a week. So I can't. And on that note, with March Madness, they're talking about, and it's pretty much been said it's going to be done, they're expanding the tournament more. Why? Are you just going to add? Who are you going to add? I don't think they're going to add more. There are no more conferences to get an auto bid. So you're not going to add any small schools to be 15, 16 seeds. That's not where you're going to put your playing games in. You're going to create more playing games for teams who weren't good enough to get an at-large bid in a 68-team field. For what? And the answer is money. But why should those teams get in? They didn't do enough. You're just saturating the field because you want to get more eyeballs on screens. And the problem is that it's working. Every now and then you see these reports come out. Oh, Michigan Ohio State basketball was the highest rated regular season conference college basketball game ever. People are watching. Probably because most people just have the same mindset as me, and the access to watch these games is so simple. Anybody can watch, and people just put them on. And honestly, I haven't watched any TV really since my son was born. I just think the quality of TV sucks, so people just want to watch sports. But whatever, that's a different discussion. So of course you're going to get higher ratings, and all that does is make advertising companies, whoever, say, I want more. I want more opportunities to put, I'm looking at a Modelo commercial. I want more opportunities to put Modelo on the screen. Find me them. Oh, you're going to add 5 more teams to the NCAA tournament who don't deserve to be there because I can get ad time. What are we doing? And so what I think may end up happening, and right now the evidence isn't there that it's going to happen because, like I just said, everybody's still watching, is with all of the conference expansion, which is how you get a team like Duke into the college football playoff, because the conferences are so big and unbalanced. There's the Duke and Virginia shared 2 common opponents, and they were in the ACC championship game. That's insanity. But that's what happens when you've got these big mega conferences and you're adding Cal and Stanford to the Atlantic Coast Conference. You're adding Oregon and UCLA and Washington to the Big Ten, which is historically a Midwestern conference. I mean, Maryland and Rutgers were one of the first kind of conference realignment situations that was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? When Penn State was added to the Big Ten in the 90s, I mean, I'm sure it was a big deal then, but when you look at it, you're like, okay, yeah, they're not really in the Midwest, but they've kind of got a Midwest football vibe. They're in the middle of the state. That's what they live and breathe. It just makes sense for them to be in the Big Ten. Maryland and Rutgers now are like, okay, well, I guess they're close to Penn State, but it wasn't a decision because they thought, you know what, these 2 teams are going to make the Big Ten better. They wanted the DC market and they wanted the New York market. So that's what they got. Now they've got the LA market. Now they've got the Seattle market. The ACC's got San Francisco. The Atlantic Coast Conference has the San Francisco market. What are we doing? Mick Cronin, who is the head coach of UCLA basketball, complains all the time about the schedules that they are forced to play, being a West Coast team in a Midwest East Coast conference. And when he first started complaining, it was like, well, that's just sour grapes. You knew what you're signing on. But he didn't make that decision to sign on to the Big Ten. He's just playing the cards he was dealt, and the cards that he's dealt are awful. But the advantage to his team is they're a revenue team. They're basketball. They make money. The I assume UCLA has a field hockey team. Field hockey teams dealing with the same stuff. I don't think they're getting the same treatment as the basketball team. I don't even think the women's basketball team's getting the same treatment as the men's basketball team. So these teams are dealing with that. They don't have NIL money. Those players don't make any money. So all of this is being done because of basketball and football at the expense of every other student athlete at those schools. And I'm going to back up. That's another thing about it. Is it's going to sound like a boomer take. The other point of college sports was you had athletes who knew they were probably not going to go pro, but they still wanted to play a sport while they got an education. Now you have all these players. The education is completely pointless. They're not there to get an education. They're there to make money. How can that positively impact the sport? Again, it only does from a revenue perspective, from an advertising perspective. Carson Beck, after, or I think it was right before the playoff final, they asked him about classes. He's in his 6th year of college football. He said, I graduated 2 years ago. I don't go to class. What? Cardale Jones famously tweeted once, he was the Ohio State quarterback. He said, I didn't come here to play school. Yeah, you're right. Well, guess what, Cardale? Now you're kind of in and out of sports. He was a quarterback in the XFL. I don't know if he still plays in the UFL. Hopefully he's ended up going to class and he got a degree or whatever. But what are you going to do if you don't make it? And you don't get a job in coaching and you don't get a job in broadcasting? Well, you're going to go be a used car salesman or whatever. Or you're going to, who knows? Down the line, are we going to see a bunch of players who made NIL money, not good enough to be pros in their chosen sport? They didn't get an education because they went to 4 different schools or 5 different schools. And now they're homeless. Seems like a little bit of a slippery slope fallacy, but it's probably going to happen. And the NCAA is going to do what? Nothing, because they're making their money. It's craziness. So how do you get out of it? Well, there's no way out of it unless you have this bubble that bursts there, where some decision is made to where the fans as a collective just say, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to watch the NBA light or the G League light in March. I want Cinderellas. That's going to be another consequence of this, is how are the Cinderellas going to win any of these games if you've got teams full of professional basketball players? Everybody complains in those seasons where everybody fills out their brackets and they're picking a Butler to go on another run, or they're picking Norfolk State to beat Duke again. Or who did they beat? They didn't beat Duke. They beat Missouri. Lehigh beat Duke. They're going to pick Lehigh to beat Duke again. That's probably not going to happen because Lehigh's not going to have any professional basketball players on their team. Duke will. They're going to ruin it. And they're going to alienate the fans. They're going to lose money. And they're going to have to reevaluate. Well, how did we get here? So how do we fix it? Well, here's how I think you fix it. If anybody has time, I don't know how hard it would be to find this. John Calipari answered one of these questions about this whole situation, and he went on for 7 minutes. And I agreed with every word that he said. But the gist of it was transfer portal can't continue this way. You need to go back to, if you transfer for any reason other than your coach was fired, you need to sit a year. Don't extend eligibility for red shirts. I think I saw somewhere, I could be making this up, but I don't think I am, that in college football, you can play 9 games and redshirt and keep that full year of eligibility. What? Why? You played most of the season. So you need to get rid of that transfer portal stuff. You shouldn't get rid of NIL. You can't. The players who are being used on billboards, they deserve to make money when their name, image, and likeness is being used. I think that makes sense. That's how you pay your players when they deserve to be played. And I know then the argument comes up, well, what about field hockey? What about volleyball? What about track? Well, they don't, those don't make money. That's the way it's going to be. And that's just unfortunate, but I don't think there's any way around that. So that's one thing. Transfer portal. Change it. 2, these mega conferences are insane. You need to split those back up. Maryland needs to go back to the ACC. The Big East needs to come back. You need to put Syracuse back in the Big East. You need to put Louisville back in the Big East. Put Texas and Oklahoma back in the Big 12. You put all these California teams and these West Coast teams back in the Pac-10. And you make them regional conferences again. There is no rivalry between Wake Forest and Cal, and there never will be. Not only because they're not close, but because the conference is so big, they're barely going to play each other. They're going to play each other once or twice every 2 years. There's no rivalry there. Versus back in the day, Maryland played Duke twice. They played UNC twice. They played NC State twice. And there was a hatred. There was a rivalry. And it made it fun. And it made people, even when a bad Maryland team came on the floor, you thought, you know what? NC State's coming to town. I want to beat them. That's what you have to do to rebuild that excitement in college sports. And then the easiest one to do is don't let professional players play college sports. I don't think there's anybody on the planet who doesn't have money in this, real money, not sports betting money, real money in the game, advertisers, the NCAA, schools. There's nobody on this planet who should be in favor of professionals playing college sports. That's the easiest one. Start there. Stop that. Stop granting people eligibility when they don't need to. There's no reason. Well, the reason is COVID. But after guys like Carson Beck graduate, people who started playing basketball and football or whatever in 2022, they don't need 6 years of eligibility. Give them 4 with a red shirt. Those are the ways you fix it. That's how you avoid a giant collapse of your sports. Which, again, they don't think is going to happen because they've got eyeballs on the screen. And unfortunately, again, my eyeballs are on the screen. But I think it's a ticking time bomb. I think I've said enough. I can't believe I was able to sit here and talk about that by myself for an hour. And I wish I could get this into the ears of the decision makers. It will never get there. And even if it did, they wouldn't care. I'm just some guy and I don't make them money. So my opinion doesn't matter. And I just said my eyeballs are going to be on the screen anyway. So I don't know. I don't know where we go from here, but I'm hoping some of my suggestions are heated. So yeah, so I think that's it for tonight. I think soon here as the baseball offseason winds down, it sounds like they keep saying that the Orioles are going to sign another pitcher, possibly Framber Valdez, possibly Zach Gallen. We'll see. But I think as we get closer to spring training, I do want to do some type of Orioles preview with some of the guys I talked about last week. So we'll do that. Maybe that'll be next week. But thanks for anybody who listened. Thanks for listening to my ranting. And that's it. Everybody stay warm. See you.